You can't ignore me! I'm a person!
The intercom crackled to life and every passenger on that plane froze. Ms. Morrison, this is Captain Reynolds. Report to the cockpit. Immediately. Flight attendant Denise Morrison was standing in the middle of the aisle when those words hit her. The color drained from her face. Her hands, which had been so steady pouring coffee and handing out napkins for the past 3 hours, began to tremble. Because Denise Morrison knew exactly why she was being summoned. And in seat 12C, an 8-year-old black girl named Aaliyah was watching her with quiet, knowing eyes. This little girl, who Denise had spent the entire flight pretending didn't exist. This child she'd walked past without a word, without a glance, without so much as acknowledging that she was a human being. For 3 hours, Denise Morrison had treated Aaliyah Patterson like she was cargo. Like empty space. Like cabin inventory that didn't warrant acknowledgement. But Aaliyah wasn't invisible. And Denise was about to find out just how seen she really was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Back to an airport terminal in Atlanta, where a grandmother was saying goodbye to her grandbaby, trying to prepare her for a world that doesn't always see little black girls as worthy of kindness. It was 7:15 in the morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, and Dorothy Patterson was holding her granddaughter's hand a little too tight. Dorothy was 73 years old. She had silver hair she kept in a neat bun, and she was wearing her good church dress even though it was a Tuesday. That was just who Dorothy was. A woman who believed in presenting yourself with dignity, no matter where you were going or who might be watching. She'd raised 3 children in the Jim Crow South. She'd marched in protests. She'd been spat on, called names, denied service, treated like she was less than human more times than she could count. And through all of it, she'd held her head high. She'd insisted on her own dignity even when the world refused to grant it. Now she was 73 and the world had changed. That's what people told her anyway. Things are different now, Dorothy. It's not like it used to be. But Dorothy knew better. The hatred hadn't disappeared. It had just learned to wear a smile. Learned to hide behind policies and procedures. Learned to operate in ways that were harder to name, harder to prove, harder to fight. And today she was sending her 8-year-old grandbaby out into that world alone. Aaliyah Patterson was small for her age, with big brown eyes and braided hair adorned with pink and white beads that clicked softly when she moved. She was wearing her favorite purple dress, the one with the butterflies on it, and she was clutching a teddy bear named Mr. Buttons like her life depended on it. Mr. Buttons had been with Aaliyah since she was 2 years old. He was missing one of his button eyes, which Dorothy had replaced with careful stitching. His fur was matted from years of being hugged too hard and loved too much. He'd been through every nightmare, every thunderstorm, every first day of school. And now he was going on an airplane. Aaliyah was excited. Nervous but excited. Her mama was waiting for her in Seattle. Jennifer Patterson had taken a job as a pediatric surgeon at Seattle Children's Hospital 6 months ago, and the plan was for Aaliyah to finish the school year with Grandma Dorothy before moving permanently. But Jennifer missed her baby girl. And Aaliyah missed her mama. So they'd arranged this spring break visit. Aaliyah's first time flying alone. Dorothy had been preparing her for weeks. They'd watched videos about airports together. Practiced what to say to flight attendants. Gone over the rules again and again. Mind your manners. Say please and thank you. If you need help, ask a grown-up in a uniform. But there was something else Dorothy needed to tell her. Something she'd been putting off because she didn't want to steal her granddaughter's innocence. Didn't want to plant seeds of fear and suspicion in that trusting little heart. But she couldn't send Aaliyah out there unprepared. Dorothy knelt down, ignoring the protest of her old knees, and looked her granddaughter directly in the eyes. Baby girl, I need you to remember something for me. Aaliyah nodded seriously. Yes, Grandma? You are just as worthy as anyone on that plane. You hear me? Just as worthy. Just as valuable. Just as deserving of kindness and respect as any other passenger. Aaliyah's face scrunched up with confusion. Why wouldn't I be? And there it was. That beautiful innocence. That assumption that the world was fair, that adults were kind, that everyone would be treated the same. Dorothy's heart ached. Sometimes people forget that, baby. Sometimes people look at you and they don't see you. They see something else. Something their minds made up before they ever met you. I don't understand, Grandma. I know you don't. And I pray you never have to. But if someone on that plane makes you feel small, if someone treats you like you don't matter, I want you to remember what I'm telling you right now. You matter. You are worthy. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not. Aaliyah hugged Mr. Buttons tighter. Okay, Grandma. I'll remember. But she didn't really understand. How could she? She was 8 years old. She still believed in fairness. Still thought that if you were polite and followed the rules, people would be kind to you in return. She was about to learn otherwise. Dorothy walked her to the gate agent, a young woman with a pleasant smile who checked Aaliyah's paperwork and clipped a bright red tag to her backpack. The tag read unaccompanied minor in bold letters, along with Aaliyah's name, her seat number, her destination, and her mother's contact information. It was impossible to miss. "She'll be in good hands, ma'am," the gate agent assured Dorothy. "The flight crew will take special care of her." Dorothy nodded, but something cold settled in her stomach. A premonition. A feeling that she was sending her grandbaby into something she couldn't protect her from. She kissed Aaliyah's forehead one more time. "You call me the second you land." "I will, Grandma." "And you mind your manners." "I will, Grandma." "And you remember what I told you." "I will. I promise." Dorothy watched as the gate agent led Aaliyah down the jet bridge, that bright red tag bouncing against her backpack with every step. She watched until her grandbaby disappeared from view. Then she sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs and prayed. Let me tell you about Denise Morrison, because to understand what happened on that flight, you need to understand who she was. What she believed. The lies she told herself to justify the ugliness she carried inside. Denise was 43 years old and had been a flight attendant for 16 years. 16 years of beverage carts and safety demonstrations and chicken or pasta? 16 years of building seniority, earning the best routes, the best schedules, the respect that came with being a veteran in her industry. She took tremendous pride in her appearance. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her uniform always immaculate, her makeup flawless even after a 12-hour shift. She wore her seniority like a badge of honor, never missing an opportunity to remind newer crew members of the hierarchy. Denise had grown up in Alpharetta, one of Atlanta's wealthiest suburbs. Her father had been a banking executive, her mother a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. She'd gone to private schools, belonged to country clubs, vacationed in Europe. She'd grown up in a world where certain things were simply understood, even if they were never spoken aloud. That there were people who belonged in certain spaces and people who didn't. That some people were worthy of respect and others had to earn it. That you could tell a lot about a person by how they looked, how they dressed, how they carried themselves. Denise didn't think of herself as prejudiced. She would have been offended by the suggestion. She had black colleagues she got along with perfectly well. She'd voted for Obama. She donated to charities that helped underprivileged children. But there was a difference in Denise's mind between those people and these people. The black professionals she worked with had proven themselves. Had earned their place. Had demonstrated that they were exceptions to whatever rule Denise carried in her heart. The others, though. The ones in coach with their loud conversations and their crying babies and their sense of entitlement. The ones who didn't know how to behave. Who didn't understand the proper order of things. Denise knew how to handle them. She didn't deny them service exactly. That would be discrimination, and Denise wasn't discriminatory. She simply prioritized. Gave her attention to the passengers who deserved it. Let the others wait their turn. And if their turn never quite came? Well, that wasn't her fault. She was a busy woman with a lot of responsibilities. On this particular morning, Denise was preparing for Flight 1847 to Seattle. Full flight, 186 passengers, 5 hours in the air. She was checking her reflection in the galley mirror, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her collar, when Keisha Williams walked in. Keisha was 29 years old, had been flying for 4 years, and was everything Denise pretended to be. Genuinely warm. Actually kind. When Keisha smiled at passengers, they felt seen. When she asked how someone was doing, she wanted to know the answer. "Morning, Denise," Keisha said, setting down her bag. "Morning." Denise's tone was just cool enough to establish the hierarchy. Senior to junior. Veteran to newcomer. "Looks like we've got an unaccompanied minor in 12C, Keisha said, checking the passenger manifest on her tablet. 8-year-old girl. I can take responsibility for her if you want. Denise's lips pressed together. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my section, thank you. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I just thought since she's so young. I've been doing this job since before you graduated high school, Keisha. I think I can handle a child." Keisha bit back whatever she was going to say. She'd learned that arguing with Denise Morrison was pointless. "Of course. Let me know if you need anything." She walked away, but something about the interaction stuck with her. The edge in Denise's voice when she mentioned the unaccompanied minor. The way she'd said, "a child," like it was something distasteful. Keisha made a mental note to keep an eye on seat 12C. The passengers began boarding. First class came first, of course. Business travelers with leather briefcases and expensive watches. Couples on anniversary trips. The retirees who'd accumulated enough miles for an upgrade. Denise greeted each of them with her warmest smile. Welcome aboard. May I help you with your bag? Right this way. Then came the main cabin. Economy. Coach. The section where most people sat. Where families squeezed three across in seats that seemed to shrink every year. Where tired parents juggled car seats and diaper bags. Where college students wore hoodies and noise-canceling headphones. And somewhere in that stream of humanity, clutching Mr. Buttons and her boarding pass, was Aaliyah Patterson. She stepped onto the plane and her eyes went wide. Everything was new. The strange recycled air smell. The narrow aisle that seemed to stretch forever. The rows and rows of seats packed with strangers. The overhead bins that seemed impossibly high for a girl who was only 4 feet tall. She was looking for her seat. 12C. The gate agent had shown her on the boarding pass, but now that she was actually on the plane, surrounded by adults brushing past her with their carry-on bags, she couldn't figure out where to go. Then she saw a flight attendant standing near the front of the economy cabin. A woman with blonde hair and a perfect smile and a uniform that looked like it had been pressed within an inch of its life. Aaliyah had been told to ask flight attendants for help. They were there to take care of passengers. That's what her grandma said. That's what the video showed. So she walked up to Denise Morrison, her boarding pass held out in her small hand, and said in her most polite voice, "Excuse me, miss? Can you help me find my seat?" Denise looked down. Their eyes met. Aaliyah's face was open and trusting. She was doing exactly what she'd been taught. Being polite. Asking for help. And something flickered across Denise's face. Something cold. Something that made a calculation so fast she probably didn't even notice she was making it. This child with her worn teddy bear and her beaded braids and her purple butterfly dress. This child with her too big smile and her bright red unaccompanied minor tag. Denise looked right through her. Her gaze slid past Aaliyah as if the child simply wasn't there. As if she was looking at empty space. Nothing. Aaliyah's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" She tried again, a little louder. Behind her, a white passenger approached. A middle-aged man in khakis and a polo shirt, also holding a boarding pass. And Denise turned to him with her warmest smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" The man glanced down at Aaliyah, then back at Denise. Something uncomfortable crossed his face. But he didn't say anything. Just handed over his boarding pass. "Oh, you're in 15A. That's right this way. Let me show you." Denise stepped around Aaliyah, as if the child was merely an obstacle to navigate, and guided the man down the aisle. Aaliyah stood there in the middle of the aisle, passengers flowing around her like water around a stone. Her hand was still outstretched. Her boarding pass was still waiting to be looked at. But no one was looking. She didn't understand what she'd done wrong. Had she not been polite enough? Had she spoken too quietly? Had she done something to upset the flight attendant? Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes people look at you and they see something else. But Aaliyah pushed that thought away. It was a mistake. The flight attendant was busy. Someone else would help her. From the back galley, Keisha had seen everything. She'd watched Denise look directly at this child and choose to ignore her. Choose to help someone else instead. Choose to treat an 8-year-old like she was invisible. Keisha's jaw tightened. But passengers were still boarding. She couldn't cause a scene. Not yet. So she did what Denise should have done. She walked up to Aaliyah with a warm smile and knelt down so they were at eye level. "Hi there, sweetheart. Are you looking for your seat?" Aaliyah's face flooded with relief. "Yes, please. I have 12C. Let me see. Oh, that's right down here. Come with me, honey. I'll show you." Keisha took Aaliyah's hand, that small hand in hers, and walked her down the aisle. Past rows of passengers settling in. Past the businessman barking into his phone. Past the couple already bickering about the armrest. Row 12. "Here you go, baby. You're right here in the middle. Let me help you with your backpack." Keisha lifted Aaliyah's bag into the overhead bin, making sure that bright red unaccompanied minor tag was clearly visible to anyone who looked. She helped Aaliyah settle into her seat. Made sure her seatbelt was fastened. Made sure Mr. Buttons was comfortable on her lap. "My name is Keisha," she said. "If you need anything at all, you press that button right there, okay? Or come find me in the back of the plane. I'll be checking on you." "Thank you, Miss Keisha." "You're very welcome, sweetheart." Keisha walked away, but her mind was racing. What she just witnessed wasn't a mistake. Wasn't an oversight. Denise had looked directly at that child and chosen not to see her. This was going to be a problem. Aaliyah was sitting in seat 12C, the middle seat, sandwiched between two strangers. On her left, in the window seat, was an elderly Asian woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Chen. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile and a floral scarf wrapped around her shoulders. She reminded Aaliyah a little bit of her grandmother. On her right, in the aisle seat, was a businessman who hadn't looked up from his laptop since he sat down. He had noise-canceling headphones clamped over his ears and was typing furiously, completely oblivious to everything around him. Aaliyah didn't mind. She had Mr. Buttons. She had her coloring book. And in just 5 hours she'd see her mama. The plane filled up. The overhead bins slammed shut. The flight attendants walked through the cabin doing their safety checks. Denise passed row 12 3 times during this process. 3 times she walked right past Aaliyah without a glance. Without a word. Without so much as checking that this 8-year-old unaccompanied minor, whose safety she was legally responsible for, was properly buckled in. Aaliyah noticed. Of course she noticed. But she told herself it was because the flight attendant was busy. There were a lot of passengers. She'd come back later. The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines roared to life. And then they were moving faster and faster down the runway, until that magical moment when the wheels left the ground and they were flying. Aaliyah pressed her face to Mrs. Chen's window, watching Atlanta shrink below them. The buildings becoming toys. The cars becoming ants. The whole world becoming small. She'd never felt so big and so small at the same time. First time flying? Mrs. Chen asked gently. Aaliyah nodded. First time by myself. You're very brave. I didn't fly by myself until I was much older than you. Aaliyah smiled. She didn't feel brave. But it was nice of Mrs. Chen to say so. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Folks, we've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. We're looking at smooth skies ahead and we should have you on the ground in Seattle right on time. Flight attendants, you're free to begin cabin service. And that's when the real test began. Denise started the beverage service from the front of the economy cabin, pushing the metal cart down the aisle, asking each passenger what they'd like. Coffee. Water. Ginger ale. Apple juice. Aaliyah watched her approach. She was thirsty. Her throat was dry from the recycled airplane air. And more than anything she wanted apple juice. Grandma always got her apple juice when they went out to eat. Row 8. Coffee and a water? Coming right up. Row 9. Diet Coke? Here you go. Row 10. 2 apple juices? Absolutely. Row 11. Just water? Perfect. Aaliyah straightened in her seat. She was next. Row 12. Denise turned to Mrs. Chen. What can I get for you, ma'am? Tea, please. If you have it. Of course. Denise poured hot water, handed over a tea bag and a napkin with a pleasant smile. Then she turned to the businessman who pulled off one headphone reluctantly. Coffee. Black. Coming right up. Denise poured, handed it over. And then she looked straight past Aaliyah as if the child simply wasn't there, and pushed the cart forward to row 13. Aaliyah's hand, which she'd been raising to get the flight attendant's attention, slowly lowered. She sat there with her mouth slightly open. Confused. Had the flight attendant not seen her? Had she done something wrong? Mrs. Chen had noticed. Her brow furrowed slightly. Excuse me, she called out to Denise's retreating back. I think you missed the young lady here. Denise didn't turn around. I'll get to her, she said over her shoulder. But she didn't. The cart continued down the aisle. Row 13. Row 14. Row 15. All the way to the back of the plane. And then Denise started the return trip, collecting trash, offering refills. She passed row 12 again. Asked Mrs. Chen if she needed more hot water. Asked the businessman if he wanted a refill. Never looked at Aaliyah. Never spoke to her. Never acknowledged that she existed. Aaliyah sat there with her dry throat and her empty tray table and her heart starting to hurt in a way she didn't have words for. She clutched Mr. Buttons tighter. What had she done wrong? Now, I need you to understand something about what was happening in that little girl's mind. Because this is where the real damage gets done. Not in the obvious cruelty, but in the quiet moments when a child tries to make sense of being treated as less than human. Aaliyah was 8 years old. She'd been raised to believe that if you were polite, if you followed the rules, if you said please and thank you and minded your manners, people would be kind to you. And she had done all of those things. She'd said, excuse me. She'd said please. She'd waited patiently. She'd followed every rule her grandmother had taught her. But it hadn't mattered. So her 8-year-old brain started searching for explanations. What had she done wrong? What was different about her? Why wasn't she worthy of a cup of apple juice when everyone else around her had drinks on their tray tables? And somewhere in that searching, somewhere in that desperate attempt to make sense of nonsense, a terrible thought began to take root. Maybe there was something wrong with her. Maybe she wasn't worthy. Maybe the flight attendant could see something Aaliyah couldn't see herself. Some deficiency. Some flaw. Some reason why she didn't deserve the same treatment as everyone else. This is what discrimination does to children. It doesn't just hurt them in the moment. It plants seeds of self-doubt that can grow for a lifetime. It teaches them to question their own worth. To wonder if maybe, just maybe, the people who treat them as less than human can see something true. Aaliyah didn't have the words for any of this. She just knew that her chest felt tight and her eyes were stinging, and she wanted her grandmother. She wanted her mama. She wanted someone to tell her that she hadn't done anything wrong. Mrs. Chen, sitting beside her, had lived long enough to recognize what was happening. She was 74 years old. She'd immigrated to America from Taiwan 50 years ago. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be treated as if you didn't belong. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small package of crackers she'd brought from home. "Would you like some, dear?" she asked softly. Aaliyah looked at the crackers, then at Mrs. Chen's kind face and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." Mrs. Chen also pulled out a small bottle of water. "Here. You must be thirsty." Aaliyah took the water gratefully. "Thank you so much." Mrs. Chen patted her hand. "Of course, sweetheart. Of course." And Aaliyah sat there, eating crackers a stranger had given her because the flight attendant whose job it was to care for her wouldn't give her anything at all, and something shifted in her understanding of the world. She was learning that kindness wasn't guaranteed. That some people would choose cruelty for reasons she couldn't understand. That her grandmother's warnings hadn't been pessimism, they'd been preparation. But she was also learning something else. That when some people chose cruelty, others would choose kindness. That there were Mrs. Chens in the world who would share their crackers. Who would see you when others wouldn't. She didn't know yet which kind of world she lived in. Whether the cruel outnumbered the kind or the kind outnumbered the cruel. This flight was going to teach her. If you're watching this right now and you're already angry at what you're hearing, I need you to hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to get so much worse before it gets better. And trust me, you're going to want to see how it ends. An hour into the flight, Aaliyah needed to use the bathroom. She'd been holding it for a while, not wanting to bother anyone. But now it was urgent. And she'd been taught that on airplanes, you were supposed to ask permission before getting up and walking around. She saw Denise walking down the aisle, checking on passengers. Aaliyah unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped into the aisle. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Excuse me, miss? May I please use the restroom?" Denise walked right past her. Not around her. Not acknowledging that she'd spoken. Just past her as if Aaliyah was a ghost. A shadow. Something that didn't register as human. Aaliyah stood there in the aisle, her bladder aching, tears starting to gather in her eyes. She didn't understand. She'd said please. She'd been polite. She'd done everything right. Why couldn't the flight attendant see her? From the back of the plane, Keisha had been watching. She'd been keeping an eye on row 12 ever since boarding, and what she was seeing made her sick. She put down the coffee pot she'd been refilling and walked quickly up the aisle. When she reached Aaliyah, she could see the tears the little girl was fighting to hold back. "Hey, sweetheart," Keisha said gently, kneeling down. "What do you need?" "I need to use the bathroom, please." Aaliyah's voice was tiny. Embarrassed. "Of course you do. Come on, let me show you where it is." Keisha took her hand and led her to the lavatory. Waited outside to make sure she was okay. Walked her back to her seat when she was done. "You're doing great," Keisha whispered as Aaliyah climbed back into 12C. "You're being so brave." But Aaliyah didn't feel brave. She felt invisible. Keisha walked to the forward galley where Denise was organizing meal trays for the upcoming service. "Denise." Her voice was controlled but barely. "Why aren't you helping the little girl in 12C?" Denise didn't look up. "I have 186 passengers to manage, Keisha. I can't hold everyone's hand. You've helped everyone in her row except her. Multiple times." Now Denise looked up, her eyes cold. "I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate watching you ignore a child. That child is fine. She has everything she needs. She doesn't have anything. I just had to walk her to the bathroom because you walked right past her when she asked for help." Denise's lips pressed into a thin line. Maybe if these people taught their children not to be so needy, they wouldn't require so much attention. Keisha felt the words like a slap. These people? She's 8 years old, Denise. She's wearing an unaccompanied minor tag. She's your responsibility. Don't tell me my responsibilities. I've been doing this job for 16 years. I know exactly what my responsibilities are. Then act like it. Denise stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm going to say this once. You handle your section, I'll handle mine. And if you have a problem with how I do my job, you can take it up with the airline when we land. Until then, stay out of my way. She turned back to her meal trays, the conversation clearly over. Keisha stood there, her hands shaking with rage. She wanted to scream. Wanted to grab Denise by the shoulders and shake her until she understood what she was doing. But she couldn't. Not here. Not now. So she did the only thing she could do. She pulled out her phone and started documenting. Taking pictures. Writing down timestamps. Creating a record of everything she'd witnessed. And she sent a text to Captain Reynolds. In seat 11A, a man named James Martinez was pretending to work on his laptop. But really, he'd been watching what was happening in row 12 for the past hour. James was 36 years old, a tech executive based in Austin, flying to Seattle for a board meeting. He'd grown up in a working-class Mexican-American family in San Antonio, worked his way through college, built a career through talent and determination and refusing to let anyone's expectations limit him. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated. To walk into rooms where people assumed you didn't belong. To have to prove yourself over and over again while others were given the benefit of the doubt. And he recognized what was happening to the little girl behind him. He'd seen Denise skip over her during beverage service. Seen her walk past when the child asked for help. Seen the confusion and hurt on that small face. It made him furious. But James also knew how these things worked. Knew that speaking up as a person of color often backfired. That you became the problem, the troublemaker, the one making things uncomfortable for everyone else. So he'd stayed quiet. Told himself it wasn't his business. That maybe there was an explanation he wasn't seeing. But when he went to the galley to get a coffee refill, he overheard part of Denise's conversation with Keisha. Maybe if these people taught their children. And something in James snapped. He walked back to his seat, opened a new document on his laptop and started typing. Everything he'd seen. Timestamps. Observations. Quotes he could remember. He wasn't going to let this be swept under the rug. 2 hours into the flight. The meal service began. Denise pushed the cart down the aisle, offering passengers their choice of chicken or pasta. The cabin filled with the smell of airline food, that particular combination of salt and preservatives that somehow managed to be both comforting and vaguely unappetizing. Row by row, Denise worked her way through the cabin. Smiling. Professional. Efficient. Until she reached row 12. She handed a meal to Mrs. Chen. Handed a meal to the businessman. And pushed the cart past Aaliyah without stopping. This time people noticed. Excuse me. A voice rang out from row 15. Sarah Connolly, a 29-year-old mother traveling with her toddler daughter Emma. You skipped the little girl in 12C. Denise turned, her smile fixed in place. I'm sorry? The child in the middle seat. You didn't give her a meal. I'll get to her. You said that during beverage service. And you never did. Other passengers were looking now. The quiet murmur of conversation died down. Eyes turned toward Denise and the cart and the little girl with the teddy bear who still had nothing on her tray table. Denise felt the weight of those stares. Felt control of the situation slipping away. Ma'am, I have a lot of passengers to serve. I'll come back. That child has been on this plane for 2 hours and you haven't given her anything. Not a drink. Not a snack. Nothing. From row 14, Deshaun Thompson stood up. He was 20 years old, a college student heading home for his sister's wedding. He'd been watching what was happening with growing disbelief. She's right, he said. I've been watching. You've walked past that little girl at least 5 times without acknowledging her. Sir, please sit down. No. Not until you explain why you're ignoring an 8-year-old child. More murmurs from the passengers now. People looking at each other. Looking at Aaliyah. Looking at Denise with expressions ranging from confusion to anger. Mrs. Chen spoke up, her gentle voice carrying further than you'd expect. The young people are correct. You have not acknowledged this child since we boarded. I have been sharing my food with her because you wouldn't give her any. Denise's smile was cracking now. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you that all passengers receive equal service on this aircraft. There's clearly been some misunderstanding. She reached over and placed a meal tray in front of Aaliyah. But she did it roughly, almost slamming it down, and she didn't include any utensils or a napkin. There. Happy now. The sarcasm in her voice was unmistakable. James Martinez stood up from 11A. No. We're not happy. Because I've been documenting everything you've done since we took off, and I'm going to make sure the airline sees every bit of it. Sir, I don't appreciate being threatened. It's not a threat. It's a promise. You're supposed to be responsible for that child's welfare. Instead, you've treated her like she doesn't exist. That's not a misunderstanding. That's discrimination. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Discrimination. Someone had finally named it. Aaliyah sat in her seat, frozen. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she understood enough. People were fighting over her. Grown-ups were angry. The flight attendant who'd been ignoring her was in trouble. Part of her wanted to disappear. To become actually invisible so everyone would stop looking at her. But another part, a small part that sounded a lot like her grandmother's voice, felt something else. Vindication. She hadn't done anything wrong. The flight attendant had. And people could see it. People were standing up for her. She wasn't invisible after all. Denise, surrounded by hostile stares, did the only thing she could think of. She retreated. I'll discuss this with the captain, she said, her voice tight. In the meantime, I need everyone to return to their seats. She pushed the cart toward the front galley as fast as she could without running. But she didn't go to the captain. She couldn't. Because the captain was already coming to her. What Denise didn't know was that Keisha's text had reached Captain David Reynolds 20 minutes earlier. And what she really didn't know was who Captain David Reynolds was. He was 53 years old. A black man. A 26-year veteran pilot with an impeccable record. Distinguished. Respected. The kind of man who commanded authority simply by walking into a room. He'd grown up in Birmingham, Alabama. His mother had been a domestic worker. His father had been a mechanic. Neither of them had graduated high school. But they'd scraped and saved to send their son to college, because they believed education was the way up and out. David Reynolds had proven them right. He'd earned his pilot's license at 19. Worked his way up from regional carriers to major airlines. Faced discrimination and doubt and people who assumed a black man couldn't possibly be qualified to fly a commercial aircraft. He'd proved them all wrong. And now he was captain of this aircraft. Responsible for 186 passengers and a crew of 7. Responsible for everyone's safety. Everyone's welfare. Including the 8-year-old girl in 12C. When he got Keisha's text describing what was happening in the cabin, Captain Reynolds felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Cold rage. He'd experienced what that little girl was experiencing. He knew how it felt to be looked through. To be dismissed. To have someone decide you didn't matter before you'd even opened your mouth. And it was happening on his aircraft. Under his command. First Officer Lisa Huang noticed his expression change as he read the text. Captain? Everything okay? Take the controls, he said. I need to check on something in the cabin. Lisa's eyebrows rose. Captains didn't usually leave the cockpit in the middle of a flight unless something was seriously wrong. Is there a problem? There might be. I need to assess the situation. He stood up, opened the cockpit door and stepped into the first-class cabin. The flight attendant working first class looked surprised. Captain? Can I help you with something? I need to walk through the cabin, he said. Just checking on a few things. He walked slowly through business class, then into economy. His presence immediately drew attention. Yes, sir, she said quietly. Captain Reynolds looked at the meal tray in front of her. No utensils. No napkin. Then he looked at Mrs. Chen. Passengers craned their necks to look at the pilot in his crisp uniform with the 4 stripes on his shoulders. He paused at row 12. Aaliyah looked up at him with those big brown eyes. He could see the tear tracks on her cheeks. Could see how tightly she was clutching that worn teddy bear. Hello there, he said gently. What's your name? Aaliyah, she whispered. That's a beautiful name. I'm Captain Reynolds. I'm flying this plane today. Are you doing okay, Aaliyah? She didn't know how to answer. She wasn't okay. But she didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Didn't want to cause more problems. Ma'am, has this young lady been taken care of today? Mrs. Chen shook her head. No, Captain. She has not. The flight attendant has ignored her since boarding. I've been sharing my own food and water with her. Captain Reynolds' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Thank you for doing that, ma'am. I appreciate you looking out for her. He looked back at Aaliyah. I'm going to make sure someone takes good care of you for the rest of this flight, okay? You're important. You matter. And I'm sorry you haven't been treated that way. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears this time. Grateful ones. The captain of the whole airplane was talking to her. Was telling her she mattered. Maybe her grandmother was right. Maybe there were people in the world who would see you even when others wouldn't. Captain Reynolds gave her a small smile, then continued walking through the cabin. He noted the passengers who'd been watching. James Martinez with his laptop. Sarah Connolly with her protective glare. Deshaun Thompson, who gave the captain a small nod. Witnesses. Plenty of them. He returned to the front of the plane and found Denise in the galley, her face flushed, her hands shaking slightly. "Ms. Morrison," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "I need to speak with you. Now." Denise's face went pale. "Captain, I can explain?" "Not here. In the cockpit." She followed him, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The walk through first class felt like a death march. Every step closer to the cockpit was a step closer to the end of her career. And she knew it. The cockpit door closed behind them. Captain Reynolds took his seat and turned to face Denise. First Officer Lisa Huang continued flying the plane, but her ears were clearly tuned to whatever was about to happen. "I've received multiple reports about your conduct toward the unaccompanied minor in 12C, Captain Reynolds said. "Reports from passengers. Reports from crew. And I just walked through the cabin myself." Denise opened her mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I observed that child myself. I observed her tear-stained face. I observed her meal tray with no utensils. I observed the other passengers who have been taking care of her because you refused to. Captain, there were a lot of passengers to serve. I was going to get to her. You signed the unaccompanied minor acknowledgement form before we pushed back. Do you remember what that form says?" Denise was silent. "It says that you accept responsibility for that child's safety and welfare throughout the flight. It says that she is to receive priority attention because she is traveling alone. It says that you are legally obligated to ensure her needs are met." "I know what the form says." "Then explain to me why, in 2.5 hours, you have not spoken one word to her. Not given her one drink. Not checked on her one time. Explain that to me." Denise's mind raced, searching for an excuse. "Any excuse. I've been busy. It's a full flight. I had a lot of other responsibilities." First Officer Huang. Captain Reynolds turned to Lisa. "You monitored the cabin cameras during your break, correct?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, Captain. I was reviewing the feeds." "And what did you observe?" "I observed Senior Flight Attendant Morrison serve every passenger in rows 8 through 15 during beverage service while skipping row 12C. I observed her walk past the child multiple times without acknowledgement. I observed the child attempt to get her attention and be ignored." Denise felt the ground shifting beneath her. Cabin cameras. She'd forgotten about the cabin cameras. "I also have this," Captain Reynolds continued, holding up his phone. "A text from Flight Attendant Williams with a detailed timeline of your conduct. Timestamps. Observations. Including a direct quote from you referring to these people, in a conversation about the child." All color drained from Denise's face. "Captain, I didn't mean." "Save it." His voice was like steel. "I don't want to hear what you meant. I care about what you did. And what you did was systematically ignore and discriminate against an 8-year-old child because of the color of her skin." The word discrimination hit Denise like a physical blow. But Captain Reynolds wasn't done. "When we land in Seattle, you will be met by airline management. There will be an investigation. The FAA will likely be involved given the unaccompanied minor regulations. Your career with this airline is probably over." Denise started to cry. "Please, Captain. I've been with this airline for 16 years. This is my life. Please." That little girl's well-being was in your hands, and you threw it away because of your own prejudice. Because you looked at a child and decided she didn't deserve to be treated like a human being. And you want me to feel sorry for you? Silence. For the remainder of this flight, you are relieved of duty. You will sit in the aft galley jump seat. You will not interact with passengers. You will not approach the child in 12C. Keisha Williams will take over your responsibilities. Is that clear? Yes, Captain. Dismissed. Denise opened the cockpit door and stepped out. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. She had to make her way through first class. Through business. Through economy. Through row 12. Every eye in the cabin was on her. They'd seen her go into the cockpit. They knew something had happened. And when she walked past Aaliyah, their eyes met. For the first time, Denise really saw her. Not as a category or a type or a representative of those people, but as a child. A little girl with braided hair and a purple dress and a teddy bear she'd obviously had since she was a baby. A child who'd done nothing wrong except exist on a flight where Denise had decided she didn't belong. Aaliyah looked at her with those big brown eyes. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just sad. And that sadness hit Denise harder than anything else had. She'd done this. She'd hurt this child. And for what? Because of assumptions she'd absorbed so long ago she didn't even recognize them as assumptions anymore? Because of prejudices she'd told herself she didn't have? Denise made it to the aft galley and collapsed into the jump seat. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself feel the full weight of who she'd become. With Denise removed from duty, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Keisha immediately took charge. She went straight to row 12, kneeling beside Aaliyah's seat. Hi Aaliyah. I know I've helped you a few times already, but I wanted to properly introduce myself. I'm Keisha, and I'm going to be taking care of you for the rest of the flight. Okay. Aaliyah nodded, clutching Mr. Buttons. First, I need to tell you something really important. What happened to you today wasn't okay. The way you were treated was wrong. And it was not your fault. Do you hear me? None of this was your fault. Aaliyah's lip trembled. I didn't do anything wrong? No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. You were polite and patient and brave. What happened wasn't about anything you did. It was about something broken in someone else. And you don't have to carry that. Tears spilled down Aaliyah's cheeks. You are seen, Keisha said firmly. You are important. You are valued. You deserve kindness and respect, and I'm sorry you didn't get it today. But I promise you, for the rest of this flight, you're going to be treated the way you should have been treated from the beginning. She pulled out a package of cookies and a cup of apple juice. I believe you wanted apple juice earlier? Aaliyah smiled through her tears. Yes, please. Then apple juice you shall have. Keisha got her settled with a proper meal, a blanket, a pillow, and a coloring book from the children's activity pack. She sat with her for a few minutes, asking about her drawings, admiring Mr. Buttons, making her laugh with silly jokes. And slowly, the tension in Aaliyah's small body began to release. She wasn't invisible anymore. Someone saw her. Someone cared. The other passengers who'd witnessed everything began to approach. James Martinez came by with his tablet. I loaded some movies on here. Kid-friendly stuff. Would you like to borrow it? Mrs. Chen offered more snacks from her seemingly endless supply. I always pack too much. Please help me eat these. Sarah Connolly brought her daughter Emma over to say hello, and the two little girls made silly faces at each other until they were both giggling. Deshawn gave Aaliyah a fist bump and a warm smile. You're tough, little one. Don't let anyone tell you different. Passenger after passenger found excuses to walk past row 12. To smile at Aaliyah. To wave. To let her know in whatever small way they could that they saw her. That she mattered. An older white gentleman from first class walked all the way back to coach with a stuffed animal the airline had given him. I think you'll appreciate this more than I will. A teenage girl gave Aaliyah a pack of stickers she'd been saving. A business traveler handed over a fancy pen as a gift. A grandmother shared cookies she'd baked for her grandchildren in Seattle. One by one, the passengers on Flight 1847 created something beautiful out of something ugly. They turned a cabin where a child had been invisible into a community where she was celebrated. And Aaliyah, overwhelmed by this flood of kindness, didn't know what to do except say thank you over and over, her voice thick with emotion. Because this was the answer to the question she'd been asking herself all flight. What kind of world did she live in? Were there more cruel people or kind people? The answer, it turned out, was complicated. There would always be Denises. People who looked at you and saw something to dismiss. Something to ignore. Something less than human. But there would also always be Keisha's. Mrs. Chen's. James's and Sarah's and Deshawn's. People who saw injustice and refused to stay silent. People who chose kindness over comfort. People who made sure you knew you mattered. And on this flight, at least, the kind people outnumbered the cruel. That was something to hold on to. I want you to pause for a second and think about what you would have done on that flight. Would you have been the person who noticed but stayed quiet? Who told yourself it wasn't your business, that there must be some explanation, that getting involved would just make things awkward? Or would you have been the one who spoke up? Who risked being labeled a troublemaker? Who decided that a child's dignity was worth your discomfort? It's easy to say you do the right thing when you're not actually in the situation. When you're not surrounded by strangers. When you're not worried about causing a scene. But the truth is, most injustice continues not because of the active cruelty of the few, but because of the silent compliance of the many. Denise could ignore Aaliyah because everyone else let her. Because for the first 2 hours of that flight, people noticed but didn't speak up. Watched but didn't intervene. Told themselves it wasn't their problem. It took Sarah Connolly standing up and saying, "Excuse me, you skipped that child," to break the spell. To make it clear that this wasn't okay. To give other people permission to add their voices. One person speaking up gave others courage. That's how it works. That's how it always works. So let me ask you directly, what would you do? Drop a comment below. Tell me honestly. I want to know. 3 hours and 45 minutes into the flight. They were beginning their descent into Seattle. The captain's voice came over the intercom, but this time, it wasn't the standard arrival announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. Before we land, I need to address something that happened on this flight today." The cabin went quiet. Every ear tuned in. One of our youngest passengers, an 8-year-old girl traveling alone, did not receive the care and respect she deserved. She was ignored. She was dismissed. She was treated as if she didn't matter. You could have heard a pin drop. That is unacceptable. It's unacceptable on any flight, but especially on my flight. I want to apologize to Aaliyah in seat 12C. Aaliyah, on behalf of this airline, this crew, and myself personally, I am sorry for how you were treated today. Aaliyah's eyes went wide. The captain of the whole airplane was apologizing to her. Over the intercom. In front of everyone. "But I also want to thank the passengers who spoke up," Captain Reynolds continued. "Who saw something wrong and refused to stay silent. Who made sure this young lady knew she was seen and valued. You showed her something important today. You showed her that when some people choose cruelty, others will choose kindness. That there are always good people willing to stand up for what's right." He paused. "Aaliyah, I want you to know something. You belong here. You have every right to be on this airplane, on any airplane, in any space where you choose to be. Don't let anyone ever make you feel otherwise. You are worthy. You are important. You matter. Now please prepare for landing. We'll be on the ground in Seattle in approximately 15 minutes. The intercom clicked off, and the cabin erupted in applause. Passengers were clapping, cheering, some wiping away tears. The tension and ugliness of the past few hours transformed into something that felt almost like celebration. Not celebration of what had happened, but of how it had been made right. Of the community that had formed in response to injustice. Aaliyah sat in her seat, tears streaming down her face, but smiling. Really smiling. For the first time since this nightmare began. She wasn't invisible. She had never been invisible. And now everyone on this plane knew it. The wheels touched down in Seattle with a soft thump. The engines reversed. The plane taxied toward the gate. Then came an announcement that surprised the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. We'll be allowing our unaccompanied minor to deplane first. Everyone else will follow after." Aaliyah looked at Keisha, uncertain. "That's you, honey," Keisha said with a warm smile. "You get to go first." "Like a VIP?" "Exactly like a VIP." Keisha took her hand, and together they walked down the aisle toward the front of the plane. But they weren't alone. Captain Reynolds was waiting at the cockpit door, his hat tucked under his arm. "I thought I'd walk you off myself," he said to Aaliyah. "If that's okay with you." Aaliyah nodded, suddenly shy. So the three of them walked together. Captain Reynolds on one side, Keisha on the other, Aaliyah in the middle with Mr. Buttons clutched against her chest. As they passed through the cabin, every single passenger acknowledged her. Smiles. Waves. High fives. Words of encouragement. "Have a great trip, sweetheart. You're so brave. Take care of yourself. We're rooting for you." It was the exact opposite of her boarding experience. Instead of being invisible, she was seen by everyone. Instead of being ignored, she was celebrated. They walked through the jet bridge and into the gate area. And there, waiting with frantic eyes and barely contained emotion, was Jennifer Patterson. She was still in her scrubs from Seattle Children's Hospital. The moment she'd gotten the message from the airline about an incident involving her daughter, she'd left the hospital and raced to the airport. Now she saw Aaliyah, her baby girl, walking toward her flanked by the captain and a flight attendant. "Mama?" Aaliyah broke free and ran. Jennifer caught her, swept her up, held her so tight it was almost hard to breathe. And they just stayed like that for a long moment, mother and daughter, reunited. "My baby. My brave, beautiful baby. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." "It's okay, Mama. It's okay now." Eventually Jennifer set Aaliyah down and turned to Captain Reynolds and Keisha, her expression a complicated mixture of gratitude and fury. "What happened on that plane?" Captain Reynolds explained. Everything. The full truth of what Aaliyah had experienced and what had been done in response. By the time he finished, Jennifer was shaking. "She did what to my daughter? To my 8-year-old daughter? The flight attendant in question has been removed from duty. There will be a full investigation. The FAA will likely be involved given the unaccompanied minor regulations. I should hope so. Miss Patterson, I want you to know that your daughter handled this situation with incredible grace and dignity. She was polite. She was patient. She didn't act out or make a scene, even when she had every right to. Jennifer looked down at Aaliyah. At this little girl who'd just experienced something no child should have to experience. Who'd learned lessons about the world that Jennifer had desperately hoped to shield her from. That's because my mother raised her, Jennifer said quietly. And my mother raised me. We know how to survive in spaces that don't want us. We shouldn't have to. But we do. Captain Reynolds nodded. You're right. You shouldn't have to. And I'm sorry that today on my aircraft your daughter had to. Keisha stepped forward. Ma'am, I put together a small gift from the airline. She handed Jennifer a bag. Vouchers for future flights. Miles for Aaliyah's account. A formal apology letter. And this is from me personally. Inside was a handwritten card and a junior pilot certificate with Aaliyah's name on it, signed by Captain Reynolds. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Both of you. Thank you for seeing my baby when someone else refused to. It was the very least we could do, Keisha said. She deserved so much better. They said their goodbyes. Captain Reynolds shook Aaliyah's hand formally, like she was a grown-up. Keisha gave her a long hug and whispered, Remember what I told you. You matter. Always. And then it was just Jennifer and Aaliyah walking toward baggage claim, hands clasped tight. Mama? Yes, baby? Grandma told me something before I got on the plane. She said I was just as worthy as anyone else. And she was right. But I didn't really understand until today. Jennifer stopped walking. Knelt down so she was at eye level with her daughter. What do you understand now? Aaliyah thought about it. About the fear and the hurt and the confusion. About feeling invisible. But also about Mrs. Chen's crackers and Keisha's kindness and the captain's apology. About all the passengers who'd made sure she knew she mattered. I understand that some people won't see me. No matter how polite I am or how good I am, some people will look at me and see something they don't like. And that's not my fault. That's their problem. Jennifer's heart swelled. But I also understand that there are other people. Good people. Who will see me anyway. Who will share their crackers and stand up for me and make sure I'm okay. And those are the people that matter. Jennifer pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. You are so wise. So much wiser than any 8-year-old should have to be. And I'm so proud of you. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. More than anything in the whole world. They stood there for a moment, holding each other, while travelers flowed around them like water around stones. Then Aaliyah looked up with a small smile. Can we get ice cream? Jennifer laughed through her tears. We can get all the ice cream you want. Behind them, back at the gate, the other passengers were deplaning. James Martinez stopped at the cockpit door. Captain, the documentation I compiled during the flight, timestamps, observations, quotes, would that be helpful for the investigation? Extremely helpful. Email it to this address. Captain Reynolds handed him a card. Consider it done. And Captain? What you did today speaking up like that. It mattered. I just did what any decent person would do. That's the thing though. Not everyone does. Sarah Connolly had her own photos and videos to share. Deshawn offered a written statement. Mrs. Chen provided her contact information as a witness. One by one, the passengers who'd stood up for Aaliyah made sure their testimony would be on record. Made sure that what had happened wouldn't be swept under the rug or dismissed as a misunderstanding. Because they'd seen something wrong. And they refused to let it go unanswered. And Denise Morrison? She was the last person off the plane. When she emerged from the jet bridge, 2 airline representatives in suits were waiting for her. Their expressions left no room for interpretation. Ms. Morrison, you need to come with us. She didn't argue. Didn't make excuses. Just nodded and followed them through the terminal. They took her to an office behind the gates. Sat her down in a chair. Explained what would happen next. Immediate suspension pending investigation. Review of cabin camera footage. Collection of witness statements. Possible FAA involvement given the unaccompanied minor violations. Almost certain termination. 16 years of service. Her entire career. Everything she'd built. Gone. Because she'd looked at an 8-year-old child and decided that child wasn't worth acknowledging. As she sat in that office, waiting to sign paperwork that would end her career, Denise had nothing to do but think. Think about the choices she'd made. The assumptions she'd carried. The ugliness she'd let grow inside her, hidden beneath a veneer of professionalism and superiority. She told herself she wasn't prejudiced. Told herself she treated everyone fairly. Told herself that the quick judgments she made about passengers were just efficiency, just experience, just common sense. But today had stripped away all those excuses. She'd looked at a child, and decided that child didn't deserve basic human kindness. Because of how she looked. Because of assumptions Denise had absorbed so long ago she didn't even recognize them anymore. And the worst part? She couldn't even say why. If you'd asked her that morning whether she was racist, she would have been offended by the question. She had black colleagues she respected. She'd voted for Obama. She donated to charitable causes. But when it came down to it, when she was tired and stressed and facing a full flight, she'd looked at a little black girl and seen, what? Something not worth her attention. Something less than. Something she could dismiss without consequence. That was the truth of who she was. And it was ugly. Denise signed the paperwork. Collected her things. Was escorted out of the airport through a back entrance. Away from passengers, away from her former colleagues, away from anyone who might recognize her. Her career was over. Her marriage would probably follow. Brad had made it clear he had no patience for scandal. But those were just the external consequences. The internal ones were worse. Because now Denise knew who she was. Really knew. And she'd have to live with that knowledge for the rest of her life. Unless she chose to change. The investigation took 3 weeks. Witness statements were collected. Camera footage was reviewed. Timestamps were verified. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Denise Morrison was terminated from her position. The FAA issued a violation notice that would make it difficult for her to work in aviation again. The airline issued a public apology and implemented new mandatory training on implicit bias and proper care of unaccompanied minors. The story made the news. Local at first, then national. Flight attendant fired after ignoring black child for 3 hours. The details emerged. The beverage service. The bathroom incident. The turbulence where she walked past without checking the child's seatbelt. Social media exploded. Think pieces were written. Discussions were had about discrimination in the service industry, about implicit bias, about what it means to truly see someone. Aaliyah's name was kept out of the press at Jennifer's request. She was just the 8-year-old passenger. But people who'd been on that flight knew. They remembered. Some reached out to the family to offer support. James Martinez sent a Christmas card with a photo of his niece, who he said reminded him of Aaliyah. "Thank you for your courage," he wrote. "You inspired a lot of adults that day." Mrs. Chen sent a package of homemade cookies with a note in careful English. "For Aaliyah. So brave, so kind. You are a very special girl." Deshaun checked in occasionally through social media. He'd started an education club at his college focused on anti-bias training. "Because of what I saw on that flight," he told Aaliyah's mother. "Because one little girl showed me how much words and actions matter." The passengers who'd stood up that day carried the experience with them. Some said it changed how they moved through the world. Made them more willing to speak up when they saw something wrong. Made them realize that silence has a cost. And Aaliyah? She went back to school after spring break. Finished her year in Atlanta with Grandma Dorothy. Moved to Seattle in the summer like they'd planned. She didn't talk much about what happened on the plane. Not because she was ashamed or traumatized, but because she'd processed it. Understood it. Integrated the lesson into who she was. Some people wouldn't see her. And that wasn't her fault. But other people would. And those were the people worth holding on to. 1 year later. Aaliyah was sitting in seat 14A on another flight, another trip to visit Grandma Dorothy. 9 years old now, a little taller, a little more confident. Mr. Buttons was still with her, though he was getting rattier than ever. She told her mother she was too old for teddy bears, but somehow Mr. Buttons still ended up in her carry-on every time she flew. This flight was different. Not because of anything bad. Because of everything good. The flight attendant working her section was a young man named Marcus who introduced himself as soon as she boarded. "You must be Aaliyah. I'm Marcus and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I get you anything? We have apple juice, orange juice." "Apple juice, please." "Coming right up. And here's a coloring book and some crayons. Do you need help with your seatbelt?" Aaliyah smiled. "No, I've got it. But thank you." "Perfect. I'll check on you in a few minutes, okay?" She watched him move through the cabin, greeting each passenger with genuine warmth, making sure everyone felt welcome. This was how it was supposed to be. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, folks, this is Captain Simmons. I want to welcome you aboard Flight 2289 to Atlanta. Aaliyah settled into her seat and looked out the window at the Seattle skyline shrinking below them. She thought about that other flight. The one that had changed her. She thought about Denise Morrison, the flight attendant who'd refused to see her. She didn't feel angry anymore. Mostly she felt sad. Sad that someone could carry so much ugliness inside them. Sad that they'd let it hurt a child. She hoped, wherever Denise was, that she was working on it. That she was trying to be better. That she was examining the prejudices she'd carried and choosing to let them go. Because people could change. Aaliyah believed that. She had to believe that. But she also thought about Keisha and Mrs. Chen and James and Captain Reynolds and all the passengers who'd stood up for her. The people who'd shown her that kindness was always an option. That justice was always worth fighting for. Those were the people she wanted to be like when she grew up. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. Marcus came by with her apple juice and a warm smile. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Aaliyah said. And she meant it. She pulled out her notebook and started to draw. Not clouds and planes this time, but people. All different kinds of people. With all different colors of skin. All of them smiling. All of them together. At the bottom of the page, she wrote in her careful 9-year-old handwriting, "Everyone deserves to be seen." 10 years later. Aaliyah Patterson graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in social work. She'd written her senior thesis on discrimination in the service industry, drawing on her own experiences and the stories of dozens of others who'd been made to feel invisible. At her graduation party, surrounded by family and friends, her mother gave a toast. When Aaliyah was 8 years old, she learned something about the world that no child should have to learn. She learned that some people would look at her and see something to dismiss. Something to ignore. Something less than human. Jennifer's voice caught, but she pressed on. But she also learned something else. She learned that when some people choose cruelty, others choose kindness. She learned that there are always good people willing to stand up for what's right. And she learned that she was worthy of being seen, no matter what anyone else tried to tell her. She raised her glass. To Aaliyah, who turned a moment of pain into a lifetime of purpose. Who has dedicated herself to making sure no one else has to feel invisible. Who makes this family proud every single day. To Aaliyah. The guests drank. Aaliyah wiped tears from her eyes. Later, when the party had wound down, she found herself alone in the backyard, looking up at the stars. Grandma Dorothy was gone now, passed peacefully in her sleep 2 years earlier. But Aaliyah could feel her presence. Could hear her voice. "You are just as worthy as anyone else. Don't let anyone make you feel small." "I didn't, Grandma," Aaliyah whispered. "I never did." She'd built her life around that promise. Around making sure other people didn't feel small either. Around seeing the invisible and speaking for the voiceless and standing up when others stayed silent. Because that's what you did when you'd been given a gift like the one she'd been given. The gift of people who saw her. Who stood up for her. Who showed her what was possible. She'd spend the rest of her life passing that gift on. 20 years later. Aaliyah Patterson stood at a podium in a conference center, addressing a room full of airline executives and customer service professionals. She was 38 years old now. A professor of social work. An author. A consultant who helped companies understand how their biases hurt people and how to do better. And today she was telling her story. "I was 8 years old," she began. "Flying alone for the first time. Excited. Nervous. Trusting that the adults around me would take care of me. That's what I'd been taught. That's what I believed." She paused, looking out at the audience. "And then a flight attendant looked at me and decided I didn't exist." She told them everything. The boarding. The beverage service. The bathroom. The meal. The turbulence. Every moment of being invisible. But she also told them about Keisha. About Mrs. Chen. About James and Sarah and Deshawn. About Captain Reynolds. "What I learned on that flight," she said, "was that the world has both kinds of people. People who look at you and see something to dismiss. And people who look at you and see a human being worthy of dignity and respect. Every single one of you makes that choice, every single day. With every passenger you serve. With every customer you encounter. With every human being you interact with. Will you see them? Really see them? Or will you look through them, the way Denise Morrison looked through me?" She let the question hang in the air. "I don't tell this story to make you feel guilty. I tell it because I believe you can do better. I believe we all can. But it requires intention. It requires examining the biases we carry, the ones we don't even realize we have. It requires choosing consciously and deliberately to see every person as worthy of our attention, our respect, our basic human decency." That 8-year-old girl on that airplane? She grew up to dedicate her life to making sure others feel seen. Not because of what the cruel flight attendant did, but because of what the kind ones did. Because they showed her what was possible. You can be that person for someone. You can be the one who sees them when others won't. You can be the reason someone grows up believing they matter. So let me ask you, who will you choose to be? She stepped back from the podium. The applause was thunderous. But Aaliyah wasn't thinking about the standing ovation. She was thinking about an 8-year-old girl clutching a teddy bear named Mr. Buttons, standing in an airplane aisle, waiting for someone to see her. She was thinking about her grandmother's words. You are just as worthy as anyone else. And she was thinking about all the people who'd proven those words true. Who'd seen her when others wouldn't. Who'd stood up when others stayed silent. That was the real story. Not the discrimination. The response to it. Not the cruelty. The kindness that rose up against it. Not one flight attendant who chose to look through a child. But all the people who chose to see her. That was the world Aaliyah believed in. The world she fought for. The world she knew was possible. A world where everyone was seen. Everyone was valued. Everyone was worthy. And no child anywhere ever had to feel invisible again. Some people will look right through you. Will treat you like you don't exist. Will decide you don't matter before you've even opened your mouth. But there will always be others who see you. Who stand up for you. Who make sure you know you're worthy. Be one of those people. Every day, in every interaction, you have the power to see someone or look through them. To make them feel valued or make them feel small. Choose to see. Because somewhere, there's an 8-year-old child waiting to find out what kind of world they live in. What kind will you show them? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And the next time you see someone being treated as invisible, speak up. Your voice might be the one that changes everything. The end.